Hello, everybody, and welcome to 12-Sided Talks. My name is Wes.
And my name is Michelle.
This is our Twitch stream where we talk about different tabletop RPG subjects, give advice if anybody's asking for advice. If you're listening to this on the podcast, I will do my best to say, hey, I'm talking to chat. Last time we did this, I did not do that. This is our second episode. It's actually our second attempt at our second episode. We had some issues last time. So let's try this. Oh, and chat says it sounds great. So good so far. So tonight's topic is what makes a good player, which is going to kind of also touch on what makes a bad player, I think. I find that it is a good idea to really evaluate whether you're a GM or you're a player, what you do at a table, and what you can do better. So, Michelle, what do you think makes a good player? Like, what's one thing you would think makes a good player?
Paying attention when it's not your turn.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you have people who they do their thing and then they just I don't know, they just zone out or they walk away or they, and I understand, okay, if you need to get up and use the restroom or you need to do stuff like that, but people who consistently do that, it makes me a little crazy because it's like, yeah, we're trying to work together here. Can you focus?
Yeah, and I think that it's really upsetting I guess it's upsetting in a lot of different games, but I know because a lot of people play D&D, one of the kind of, I guess, tropes or whatever, cliches is you do your turn, you roll your attack, and then you get on your phone and you do something else and everybody's acting. And when it gets back to your turn, you don't know what you're going to do. You have to ask what's going on. And then suddenly you're the person slowing up the combat. And in a lot of those games, if it's combat centric, combat takes a long time. And so I think paying attention is definitely probably at the top three. One for me is being able to understand that it's an ensemble cast of players, whether you're doing a home game, whether you're doing a actual play or a convention game, you have to be considerate with people's time and not hog the spotlight. There's, so.
Absolutely. And there's the whole idea of step up and step back, step up and do what you're supposed to do, but then step back and let other people do their thing. It's not, I think there are a lot of players who feel like they're the only one who is contributing anything worthwhile. And it's like, no, there are other players here at the table who are worthwhile and wonderful players, and they need to be allowed to do their thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. You see it a lot I've seen it a lot in convention games where somebody rolls in and they're really, really familiar with the game. And then you have the newbies. And the newbies are not really sure what they're doing. And they kind of get steamrolled. And it's like, if we want to add people into our community who are going to have fun, then you have to give them a chance to speak. And you have to let them make mistakes. You have to be generous with your time because it's an ensemble cast.
Yeah, in the chat, Bowman said, know your character's abilities and how to use them. And I said, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Is especially in Bowman's saying the more crunchy games, when you're dealing with a magic user who's, let's say, 5th or 6th level, or if you're playing any game with magic or some kind of, superhero game or something where it's really important for you to not only know what you're going to do next and what your action's going to be, what are the other people going to do? What,
Yeah.
you know, like, how are you going to affect them by using your ability at that particular time?
Yeah. I think for me, another thing is just taking notes, you know, and maybe that's the student in me,
Or the teacher?
in me, or the teacher. But I mean, I've always taken notes at my games and as a player, because I don't GM. I've never had the desire, honestly.
You've never been a sadomasochist before?
I've always had so many people, just like side note conversation. I've always had people like, "Oh, you've never wanted to GM?" It's like, no, I'm a teacher. I herd cats all day. Why would I want to do this on my off time? You know? But,
man.
you know, but I get it. I get why people GM, but it's just not my thing. But as a player, I've always taken notes, because from session to session, you're going to forget things. It's important to know what items you're carrying, who's carrying what items, NPCs, places you've been, plot points that maybe you passed up and maybe want to swing back around to. There's a lot, just a lot.
Yeah, and clues, and you, especially in games like when we were doing, well, any of our games that we record for 12-sided stories, they go pretty deep in the weeds with like NPCs and clues and everything else. And it's important for everybody to take notes, because all of us can miss something. Even the GM, I have had times before where it's like, oh shit, what I name that guy? Because it's some random NPC, you know, in the Vaesen game. This isn't a big spoiler or anything, but there's a chicken, and it's like, okay, is the chicken going to become a pet? Or are we going to name the chicken? So let's say, I'm not going to give away what happens with the chicken, but I am going to say that if you named it, I might have forgotten the name because I forgot to write it down.
We thought about naming it. I don't remember if we came up with one.
Yeah, I don't remember that either. But I'm excited for that game to come out, because it's fun. But any of our Otherworld Hollywood had so many storylines going on, and Seattle did too. Seattle had a ton of different things going on.
Well, and I have to say, something I've appreciated about all of our casts is that everybody takes notes. They're paying attention. They're taking notes. And so something I may have missed, someone else has gotten into their notes,
Right.
you know, or, you know, there may be one person who got something into their notes that none of the rest of us got. And it could be a crucial clue or something important like that. And so I appreciate the fact that all of us were taking notes.
Yeah, it's an important part. I think communication is pretty high up on the list, and I'm not talking about your improv skills, which it's always, you know, if you're playing a home game, we'll get into the whole improv thing later. That's a whole show within itself. But I'm more just talking about being able to have good communications with the other players. If there's a problem, being an adult about it, not getting, you know, wound up in your head about any particular rule, allowing yourself to step back and listen to what other people's opinions are. You know, communication's a big, important thing.
Absolutely. It is. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever had so much trouble with someone at a table that I had to have one of those side conversations. Usually it's something that can just be worked out right then and there. But I do know of tables where there have been just personal conflicts. And if the two people would have just set their egos aside a little bit and talked about it, it would have been better for everybody involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that the times that I have been side, like, I guess, sideswiped by problems at the table and people not communicating or just kind of being jerks or whatever have been convention games. When you get 6 people who don't know each other, you always get the one person who is just, you know, we're geeks. A lot of us are socially awkward and we have issues with being around a lot of people, and it can be stressful and difficult. And a lot of us don't do well under that kind of pressure. And so you get a lot of people who they come into a convention game and they just don't do well and end up kind of rubbing everybody the wrong way.
Yeah, Bowman says in chat, don't step on other players' fun and don't use your fun to step on other players.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of those things that you run into a lot with, I'll say with convention games and with younger players, a lot of times will kind of be oblivious to that. I've had a few times where I've had, you know, high schoolers playing games and, you know, they just don't understand that concept.
Although I have to say that the only time I ever LARPed, I was at a convention and a friend of ours was running a LARP and said, hey, you know, will you be in this LARP? Okay. And it was very fun. I had a blast, but we were supposed to be kind of like musketeers, you know, and fighting with rapiers and stuff. And he had these padded rapiers. And I end up having to fight against this 17-year-old kid who was very sweet, but he was the head of his sword fighting club at school.
Yeah.
And this kid knew how to sword fight, and I had no clue. And so I'm just like swatting my sword, and then he leans in and he goes, don't aim for my sword, aim for me. And I'm like, oh, because you know how when you're sword fighting, you just kind of aim for the sword? And he's like, no, aim for me. I'm like, oh, okay. And he was coaching me the whole time.
Anytime.
It was very funny.
That's awesome. Yeah, anytime you can get into a situation where you have somebody that is giving at a table or in a LARP, that's a good thing. That's another great thing is, you know, helping one another out. And I'm not a big fan of people who are rules lawyers all the time. I do appreciate when people know the rules and are helpful with the rules, but it doesn't help if someone's at the table and they're just kind of, well, actually, and constantly pushing up their glasses as they tell the entire table the way it's supposed to work. People who take the time to interact with you and help you out, those are amazing players that you really want at your table. So what other ones can we think of? We've gone through quite a few.
Things that make a great player at the table.
Going to Juilliard? Not just kidding.
And that's how I got into Juilliard.
Exactly.
No, I think just rolling with it. Whatever happens, just roll with it.
Yes, and.
Don't fight it. Yes, and. I know that's cliche.
It's cliche. It's very cliche, but it does work. It does. It's one of those things where if you say no in improv, if you say no, it stops the scene.
It stops the action, you know, and in improv, they always tell you yes, and, or yes, but, and you don't have to say those words, but you agree with it and you roll with it. And just like Bowman says in chat, don't say my character wouldn't do that. Well, figure out why they wouldn't do that. And if you just say no, okay, you've stopped the action, especially if it's a horror game And you're like, do you do this? Well, no. Well, okay, the real you may not do this, but let's, behind that door could be an unspeakable horror, but it's also story.
Yeah, like Ryan said, it's plot.
It's plot.
Whatever's behind that door is plot. I think a lot of players have a hard time with that concept, especially if you're coming from a war game kind of situation or a Pathfinder situation where it's a super crunchy game and you're trying to make the most powerful character you can, and so it's about winning. And it's like, no, pull back, especially in a horror game. Failure is an amazing thing.
Yeah. It took me a while as a player to learn that failure is actually a good thing in RPGs, that you can't win at D&D.
Right.
That failure is actually wonderful, and some of your best memories are made from your failures.
Bowman's talking about, I believe, Trail of Cthulhu Drives deals with that, and it's like, yeah, Gumshoe is so good. It's such a good system. I really enjoy it.
I like it.
We have not played Trail of Cthulhu on the podcast yet, but I do think that we should definitely give it a go, because I think it'd be a fun thing to do.
I think Gumshoe as a system in general is just, it's so flexible, and
it is.
It's so nice. And like, I love Fear itself. Yeah. As a game, like as a setting, and then the Gumshoe mechanic just really helps drive the story forward.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we've done like 3 Fear itself Halloween things. I think this year we should try to do one, because I think it's a good tradition. We skipped last year because we had Otherworld Hollywood kind of, rolling along. And I think this year might be a good time to just get together, maybe some older cast members that haven't played in a while, and do something cool with Fear itself, or even Trail of Cthulhu. Just something Gumshoe horror adjacent. The other one I want to do soon is the King in Yellow, which is a Gumshoe one that they came out with a while ago. Yeah, I have it. So among all of my other games I have not run yet. But back to players. I appreciate players that show up on time, probably more than most, because I'm a schedule person. And for me personally, I have a really hard time dealing with people who don't show up on time. It's difficult for me. Makes my eye twitch. I also really enjoy people who can show up at all. Scheduling tabletop RPGs in general is so difficult, because everybody's got a life. Everybody's got stuff going on. We're not 16 years old anymore, where we have a whole weekend we can play or whatever, or we can meet up, and I get that. And so if you commit to a game, make sure that you have the time for the game.
Well, I think too, for home games, sometimes you might have to adopt a poker night mentality, where poker night is sacred and you don't book anything else on that night, unless it is something that can't be helped, like your sister's wedding, you know what I mean? But other than that, like, if you say we're doing the first Thursday of every month, then you block that out for the year, as I'm not doing anything else on the first Thursday of every month.
Oh, man. I would love a weekly game like that for a year. That would be amazing. So I think that's a big one. So let's talk about our second topic, which kind of plays into the first one a little bit, which is monster romances. Can they kill your game? And the answer to that is, well, maybe. Really depends on the monster romance and what the tone of the game is. So I think we actually skipped right over this one. Tone of the game. Players that buy into the tone of the game, which goes back to, you've got 4 players who won't go into the door because they're afraid of what's going to happen to their character. It's like if you're playing a horror game, you have to buy into what the tone of the game is, what the mood of the game is. Mm-hmm. So if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and your bard is trying to sleep with every monster that suddenly appears, oh, it's a dragon? Can I try to charm or whatever? I feel like that can slow things down unless you are playing a game with a lot of comedic effect in it, which, let's face it, D&D has a lot of that. There are times it works, but you really have to know the room. You have to read the room. You have to know what you're doing. The Cernunnos thing in Otherworld London was that was a complete out of left field thing, but it really helped the show in general because it was very interesting. Now, let's say it had been any other god. Let's say it had been some kind of, tentacled creature or whatever. It might not have hit the same. It might have not worked at all. So...
Well, and let's face it, Terry is
really
an
good.
Excellent actress. And, she understood the tone and didn't take it where it could have gone. It could have gone into comedy territory, or it could have gone into some really uncomfortable spaces, but, but it didn't because, Terry's a professional and she gets that. But, I think it all has to do with tone. Like, if you're doing a game where your big bad or big bads are vampires or something like that, or even werewolves or whatever, romance might be a possibility.
Oh, absolutely.
But you're right. If it's some like horrific tentacle creature or horrible, hideous thing, that might not translate where you want it to go.
No, if it's vampires or other, sexy monsters, let's just call them what they are. Vampires were specifically written for, sexy time.
Sexy time. Sexy time.
They're sexy time monsters. And that's understandable. But like I said, I think you have to read the room. I think you have to know the mood and kind of figure out where you'll land and understand it might go bad. It might not work the way that you want it to. I think that's really the crux of it all. So basically, to kind of sum up what makes a great player: be open-minded, read the room, keep the mood of the table going, be generous with your help,
fellow players,
be generous with their time as much as you are with your time. Don't take up too much time. Make sure everybody gets a chance to kind of shine. And, remember that GMs are also players too.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times GMs aren't really seen because they, from Dungeons and Dragons, they put like a really strong, kind of break between the two. The GM was the judge. He adjudicated...
Judge, jury, and executioner.
Right. He adjudicated the rules. He was dispassionate. I'm just here to challenge people, and if they die, they die.
I'm not a sadist. No.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that modern games have kind of taken that away from the GM role, and it's more of, hey, here's this really cool idea I came up with. How are you guys going to mess it up? And then the players come in and mess it up and do something you would have never thought of, which is always the fun part. It's like, oh, I guess we're going left. I thought we'd be going right. So let's talk about GMs for a second then, because they are players. What is your favorite thing about GMs? What thing makes a GM a good GM to you?
Definitely flexibility, not railroading the players. It's really easy to have where you want the players to go in mind, but forcing them into that when they're wanting to explore this world. Think about it like a video game, a sandbox game, where you can go anywhere. And some places may be too high level for you, and you'll find out when you die and respawn, or when you look at whatever monster's there and the hit points are like way, way, way too high.
Or their name's in purple.
Exactly. But it's still your sandbox to explore.
Yeah.
And when GMs say, okay, here's this sandbox, you're like, oh, great. But you're only allowed in this section of it.
Right.
And that's really difficult. So flexibility, I think, is really important. I also think communication, just as much as with players, with the other players. Communication is absolutely important, and listening to the players.
Yeah, I think, as a GM, I can tell you that sometimes players can just really drone on and on. It's very tiring. But you're right. We do have to listen to you every once in a while. Have to put up with the talking. And,
put up with the crap. No.
But in all seriousness, it is... I remember I played in a few games where I've been railroaded really hard, and where it's like, I only can handle this thing. And GMing is not an easy thing. It is not like anybody can GM, but don't fool yourself. You have to practice, and you have to learn how to do things, and it takes time and effort. And you can't have an ego about it, especially if you're a new GM. You can't let your ego basically have you be too, I don't know, just not able to take criticism. You got to learn to grow, Well,
yeah. And listening to your players, if players are saying, hey, this isn't fun for me because of X, Y, and Z, instead of saying, well, I'm the GM, and and I've seen GMs do this.
Oh, yeah.
Where they're like, well, I'm the GM, and if you don't like it, you can find another game. It's like, okay, I will. Why? Bye. Listening to the players saying, okay, well, what is it that's making it not fun for you? And trying to work something out. And I agree with you wholeheartedly on setting your ego aside. Like, check your ego at the door, and not being one of those GMs who's so proud of how many TPKs they have.
Yeah.
TPKs happen, and sometimes they're hilarious and wonderful, but and the GM can enjoy that, whatever. But when it's more like, how on World War II airplanes, they would put little bombs as hashtags of how many places they, you feel like they've got these little TPK marks somewhere. They're really proud of how many times they've screwed the players over. And it's like, okay, but that's not fun for the players.
Yeah, when you're looking for ways to just kill everybody in your game or do these hideous death traps. And I think that's an older thing that was done a lot where, Tomb of Horrors is basically Gary Gygax's I want to kill everybody in this game kind of situation.
He wrote that as an FU to everybody.
Yeah,
He really kind of did.
Yeah, he was upset with his players. He wanted to teach them a lesson, so he made this really difficult game. When you're GMing, you have to be able to say yes and as well. You can't. There's been so many times in 12-sided stories where you all have come up with something that I didn't think about. I'm trying to think of something that's not going to, because there's one in the Vaesen game, but I don't want to say that one. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you have to look at other stuff. What are other things GMs do that are good/bad?
Well, okay. This is kind of veering a little bit off topic.
That's fine.
But opinion on GMs fudging roles.
Ugh.
Not to hurt players, but to help them.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. As a player, I'm all for it.
Really?
No, I mean, I understand people's arguments against it because everyone is there to have fun. And if your players get killed off too early, or if there's something that happens that would really just devastate the party to where they might lose morale as players.
Right.
I can see fudging rolls.
I think it goes back to what kind of game you're running. And so if you're playing D&D first edition or second edition and you're doing rules as written, so everything is as written, you're doing everything down the line, or Traveler, or any other thing from the early days. The entire group should understand that death and those TPKs you were talking about could happen very easily. And there are some games where it's like, yeah, make your rolls in front of the players so that they know exactly what you roll. I had a game once where we were playing GURPS, and Barry had his favorite character. And in GURPS, an 18 is basically a critical hit. You do this massive amounts of damage. And I was rolling in front of him, and I rolled 3 18s in a row.
Oh.
Yeah, it was terrible. And his character, it was a gladiator fight. He basically got knocked out very quickly and died. So if I had done it behind a screen, I could have lied about it and said, oh, he missed or whatever. And I think story-wise, that probably would have been better, seriously wounding a character, but them being the hero of the story, making it out can sometimes be better. I really think it comes down to what the table's expecting, what the table's okay with. If the table knows that, okay, we're not fudging rolls, we're doing all the rolls out in the open, except for maybe like stealth rolls and stuff where, somebody can surprise you if you missed a roll, that's fine. But if you're playing like a home game or a convention game, everyone's having fun, everybody's just,
yeah,
that's different. Then you might want to fudge rolls every once in a while. I will admit that in some convention games, I have done that, especially if I've had younger players, and it's like, I don't want to cause the newbies to never come back,
Well, and I've been in situations of playing D&D with kids, specifically, not just younger players, like kids. And you don't want to make them hate the game, and they're 12.
I had one game where I had a player that literally ruined the game for the entire table.
Boo.
Yeah, it was. We were playing GURPS, and it was at a convention, and we had a packed room. There was like 6 players, and this guy just would not let up. And so, about halfway through the game, I just was like, I have to do something about this player, and I took him out. And it's like, it might seem harsh, but if you're a GM and you're watching the entire table just tank because one person is ruining the experience for everyone else, then you have to make kind of a decision and go from there, you know?
Yeah.
It's not something I like to do. I try to communicate with players as much as possible and say, hey, calm down. I think as a GM now, this was years ago. This was like my second or third convention, like 20 years ago. So I think I'd probably be a little bit more able to handle it because I have experience, a lot more experience now with playing with people that I've never met before. You know, at the time I did not.
Yeah.
So experience really does help kind of get you there. So again, as a GM, you have to be open to learning, open to realizing that you're constantly growing, you're constantly becoming better, and your players are adding so much to your game. They really are helping build the story. If you want the story to be just what you think it should be, that's called a novelist, a writer, which is great. Write a story.
Yeah, write a novel.
If you want control over every single thing and where everything is going, there is an app for that. You know, you can become a writer. So, well, we got a few more minutes, so let's talk about just random stuff that's going on with 12-Sided Stories. We are one game away. Next week is the finale of Candlestick Crimes. I had so much fun with that game. Just because
we had a good time.
Yeah, it was, you know, I kind of look at it kind of like a palate cleanser because we had been playing Otherworld Hollywood, which was an amazing game, which happens to be nominated for an Annie. It was an amazing game, but go vote. So, and we had a lot of fun with it, but it was 31 episodes, so it lasted over half a year. You know, it was one of our longest continuous shows. And so doing a little 6-episode thing of Swords of the Serpentine was great. It was a lot of fun to do something that was just, you know, lighthearted and about scented candles.
That one was just so much fun because Swords of the Serpentine is, first of all, a really, really fun setting. And again, it's a sandbox, and there's so many aspects to Eversink that you could literally have hundreds of adventures there with different parties who never meet each other.
Right.
You know, or who do, if you want them to.
Yeah.
So it was such a blast, and I really just loved the silliness of it and the whole scented candles.
Yeah, like I said, we needed something that was, I love horror. I really do. It's one of my favorite things. The Vaesen game is really, really spooky. But I think sometimes you need a break from it, and you need to be able to, so if it's horror all the time, you can get kind of burnt out. And so once we're done with Vaesen, we're going to do more Candlestick, you know, which is the plan. So we can kind of finish up the story. Otherwise, things are going really, really well right now. Like I said, kidding aside, we are up for that innie, which we talked about at the first episode. And whether or not we win or lose, it has really helped kind of up our brand in people's mind, our visibility. Yeah. It's really been helpful with that. And that's the thing that's the most important to me, is it just getting more ears on what we're doing so that people can enjoy it and we can have more people jump on board. And I've always said we've put out really good shows, but I don't think a lot of people know we're there. So that's been nice. So anyway, Bowman, thank you so much for hanging out in chat.
I know. Thank you.
We appreciate it, and we appreciate you throwing out your suggestions for what makes a good player. We will be back next week for another episode. I'm not sure what our topics will be next time.
I'm not sure either.
We'll have to figure that. We might talk about monsters, different types of monsters. I don't know. I have a whole list of things. So thanks so much, Bowman. Have a great weekend yourself, and everybody else who's listening to us on this podcast or watching us on YouTube or whatever. Thanks for hanging out and listening. Check out our links below. Come join our Discord. Follow us on all the social media at 12Sided Stories, the number 12 and then Side Stories, or check out our website, which is 12Sided Stories, all written out, all one word.com. Thank you so much. We will see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.